She ended our 5-year relationship with one calm sentence. "You have a good heart." But good hearts rarely build extraordinary lives. I didn't try to change her mind. 8 months later, she accidentally walked into a business conference where my opening speech received a standing ovation before I had even finished my first story. "You have a good heart," Melissa said, setting her coffee cup down on the kitchen island like she was closing a business meeting. "But good hearts rarely build extraordinary lives." She wasn't crying. That's the part one still can't get past. 5 years, and she delivered the end of us with the same tone she used to read grocery lists out loud. I didn't argue. I didn't ask her to stay. I just nodded, like she'd told me the dishwasher was broken again, and said, "Okay." 8 months later, she walked into a hotel ballroom in downtown Denver, found a seat near the back because she was running late, and watched a man on stage get a standing ovation before he'd even finished his first story. She didn't recognize him right away. Then he turned his head toward the light, and she did. If you enjoy real stories like this, subscribe, because what happened next changed everything for me. We met at a work conference in Austin, the kind where everyone wears a lanyard like it means something. I was 28, an operations analyst for a mid-sized logistics company, the kind of job where you explain to people at parties what you do twice, and they still don't understand it. Melissa was in marketing for a competing firm, sharp in a blazer that fit her like she'd been born into confidence. She found me standing near the coffee station, staring at my phone like it might rescue me from a conversation with a man explaining supply chain software with too much enthusiasm. "You look like you'd rather be anywhere else," she said. "Is it that obvious? You've refilled that coffee 3 times and haven't drunk any of it." I looked down. She was right. I laughed, and she smiled in a way that made the conference room feel smaller. We talked for 40 minutes. She was funny in a dry way, the kind of funny that took me a beat to catch up to. She asked good questions. She listened like she was actually listening, not just waiting for her turn to talk. At the end of the night, she gave me her number without me asking for it. "You're not going to ask," she said. "So I'm doing it for you." That was Melissa. She moved first. Always. We built something good in the beginning. I want to be honest about that, because it would be easy, now, knowing how it ends, to pretend the first 3 years were nothing. They weren't nothing. She used to leave sticky notes on my bathroom mirror before early flights. Small things. "Don't forget you're good at this." I kept a few of them in a drawer for years after we broke up, which is probably something I shouldn't admit, but it's true. We moved in together after year 2, a 2-bedroom apartment near the Highlands in Denver, the kind of place with exposed brick that landlords charge extra for. She picked the couch. I picked the TV. We fought about the thermostat more than anything else, which in hindsight was almost sweet, because it meant nothing else was really wrong yet. I worked at Hallbrook Logistics, steady but unglamorous. Melissa worked at a growing ad agency downtown, the kind of place with a ping-pong table in the break room and a culture deck on the website. She got promoted twice in 3 years. I got a small raise once, and a great job this quarter, email the other times. She never said anything about it directly. That wasn't her style. But I started noticing the way she talked about her coworkers, the ones actually going somewhere, she called them, without meaning to compare me to anyone, and definitely not meaning for me to notice that she had. I noticed anyway. The first real crack didn't come as an argument. It came as a question. We were at her coworker's engagement party, one of those rooftop things with string lights and a signature cocktail named after the couple. Her coworker's fiancé had just closed some 6-figure deal, and everyone was toasting him like he'd cured something. On the drive home, Melissa was quiet for a while. Then she asked, "Do you ever think about doing something bigger?" "Bigger how?" "I don't know. More ambitious." "You're smart. She stopped herself. "Never mind. No, finish it. You just seem comfortable where you are. And I don't know if that's good or if it's just safe." I didn't have a good answer. I told her I liked stability. She said stability wasn't a bad thing. But she said it the way people say things they're trying to convince themselves of, not things they believe. We didn't talk about it again for months. But I noticed she stopped bringing up promotions in front of me, like she decided it would only make things worse. There's a difference between someone who leaves because they stopped loving you and someone who leaves because they're afraid of what staying will cost them. I understand that difference now. I didn't understand it then. Melissa's mother had raised 3 kids alone after her husband walked out when Melissa was 11. And I think some part of Melissa spent her whole adult life terrified of ending up in a version of that story, dependent, stretched thin, watching someone else's ambition define the ceiling of her own life. She never said this outright. She didn't have to. It came out sideways, in comments about financial independence, in the way she flinched slightly whenever her mother called asking for money. I used to think her pushing me was about ego. It wasn't only that. It was fear wearing the costume of ambition. That doesn't make what she said to me fair, but it makes it human. By year 4, the cracks had widened into something you couldn't ignore anymore. We stopped having real conversations and started having logistics conversations. Whose turn to do laundry? What time she'd be home? Whether we were doing anything for her mother's birthday. I remember one night specifically, a Tuesday, nothing special about it, when she came home late from a work dinner and I asked how it went. Fine, she said, not looking at me, already halfway to the bedroom. Just fine. David got the Denver account. That's basically a director track now. That's great. Yeah. She paused at the doorway. It is. She said it like a door closing. I didn't chase it. I told myself I was giving her space. Looking back, I think I was just afraid of what she might say if I asked her to say more. The apartment got quieter that winter. Not angry quiet. Just quiet. The kind where two people can sit in the same room and not actually be together in it. She started going to the gym at 6 in the morning, which she'd never done before. I told myself it was healthy. Maybe it was. But I also noticed she'd started dressing differently for work. Sharper, more deliberate. And I wondered, without wanting to, whether any of it was about being seen by someone other than me. I never found evidence of anything. I want to be clear about that. Melissa never cheated, as far as I know, and I don't believe she did. This isn't that kind of story. What was happening was slower and, in some ways, worse. She was quietly deciding, month by month, that the life she wanted didn't have room for the man I currently was. In March, her company sent her to a leadership retreat in Scottsdale. She came back different. Not cold. Just resolved, in a way I couldn't name yet. I had a really good conversation with our CMO. She told me one night, unprompted. She said something that stuck with me. What did she say? That most people spend their whole life waiting for permission to want more. I nodded, not sure what to do with that. I don't want to be one of those people, Melissa said. Not to me, exactly. More like she was saying it to herself, and I happened to be in the room. I should say something about who I was, because I don't think I come off well in this part, and I don't want to pretend I do. I was tired. Not lazy, tired. I'd worked at Hallbrook for 6 years, doing solid, unremarkable work, telling myself that stability counted for something, that not everyone needed to be building an empire. There's truth in that. But there's also a version of stability that's really just fear dressed up as contentment, and I think I was living in that version without admitting it. When Melissa asked if I ever thought about doing something bigger, the honest answer was yes, constantly, and it terrified me, so I stopped letting myself think about it out loud. I had an idea, actually. Had it for 2 years. A consulting model for small logistics companies, the kind too small for the big firms to bother with, drowning in inefficient systems they didn't know how to fix. I used to talk about it after a few beers with my friend Danny, who ran a small distribution business out of Aurora and kept telling me I was sitting on something real. You should just do it, Danny said once, over wings at a bar off Colfax. With what money? What clients? Start with me. I need exactly what you're describing. Melissa would kill me if I quit a stable job for a maybe. Danny looked at me for a second too long. Does she know you have the idea? I didn't answer that, because the answer was no. I'd never told her. Some part of me, I understand this now, didn't want to risk her reaction. It was easier to imagine the idea in private, safe from judgment, than to say it out loud and watch her face while she decided whether to believe in me. That silence cost me more than I knew at the time. The end didn't come as a single explosion. It came as a series of small withdrawals, like a bank account you don't check closely enough until it's empty. She stopped asking about my day. I stopped offering details about it. We started sleeping at different times, her early mornings for the gym, my late nights scrolling my phone in the living room because the bed had started to feel like a place we coexisted rather than a place we were together. In April, she went to her cousin's wedding in Chicago without me. It's just family stuff, she said. You'd be bored. I didn't push. 2 years earlier, I would have pushed. She came back from that wedding with a specific kind of clarity in her eyes. I didn't know it yet, but she'd made a decision somewhere over Illinois, looking out an airplane window, about what she wanted her next 5 years to look like, and I wasn't in the picture she'd drawn. It happened on a Sunday morning in May. Sunlight coming through the kitchen window at an angle that made everything look calmer than it was. She was already dressed, coffee already made, like she'd rehearsed the moment before I woke up enough to be caught off guard. "We need to talk," she said. I sat down slowly, the way you do when you already know, somewhere underneath your ribs, exactly what's coming. "I've been thinking about this for a long time," she said. "I don't think this is working anymore." "Because of what?" She looked at me, not unkindly, which somehow made it worse, and said the sentence I would replay for the next 8 months of my life. "You have a good heart. But good hearts rarely build extraordinary lives." I sat there for a second, waiting for the rest of it. There wasn't a rest of it. That was the whole verdict. "So that's it," I said. 5 years, and that's the thing you land on. It's not the only thing, but it's the truest thing I can tell you." I didn't yell. I didn't beg. Some part of me, the part that had spent months quietly absorbing every small withdrawal, had already made peace with this conversation before it happened. I think that's why I didn't fight it. Not because I didn't care, because I'd already grieved it in installments, long before the funeral. "Okay," I said. She blinked, like she'd expected more resistance and didn't know what to do with its absence. "Okay," she repeated. "You made your decision. I'm not going to talk you out of loving someone else's version of a future." She looked down at her coffee cup. For the first time in months, I saw something crack in her composure. Not regret exactly. More like the uncomfortable realization that walking away clean is never actually clean. "I didn't want to hurt you," she said quietly. "I know," I said. And I did know. That was the strange part. I believed her. The apartment felt enormous after she left. Not because it was big, it wasn't, but because silence takes up more space than a person does. She took the couch. I kept the TV. It felt like a strange, quiet parody of how we'd furnished the place 4 years earlier. Except now, every object she left behind felt like a museum exhibit of a life that used to exist here. Her toothbrush stayed in the bathroom cup for almost 3 weeks after she moved her things out. I don't know why neither of us threw it away. Maybe neither of us wanted to be the one who finally admitted it was over. I went to work. I came home. I ate dinner standing at the kitchen counter because sitting at the table by myself felt like a punishment I hadn't earned. Danny called twice a week, mostly to make sure I was still getting out of bed, though he never said it that directly. "You look like hell," he told me over beers one night in early June. "Thanks. I mean it as a compliment. Hell looks better than your apartment probably does right now." I laughed, the first real laugh in weeks. "It's not that bad. When's the last time you did laundry?" I didn't answer, which was answer enough. Grief, I learned, doesn't move in a straight line. Some days I felt almost fine, functional, like a person recovering from a bad flu. Other days, usually triggered by something absurd, like finding a grocery receipt with her handwriting on the back, I'd sit in my car in a parking lot for 10 minutes before I could make myself go inside. I kept replaying the sentence. Good hearts rarely build extraordinary lives. At first it made me angry, then it made me sad. Then, somewhere in July, it started to make me curious, in an uncomfortable way, because some traitorous part of my brain kept asking, was she wrong? I didn't want her to be right. But I also couldn't prove she was wrong, because I hadn't tried anything that would prove it either way. I had a good heart. I also had an idea I'd never had the nerve to chase, a job I'd stayed in because leaving felt harder than staying, and a 5-year relationship that had just ended with a woman telling me, calmly, that my comfort had become my ceiling. I didn't want to build an extraordinary life to prove her wrong. Revenge is a bad architect. It builds ugly things. But somewhere in that summer, sitting alone in an apartment that used to be ours, I started wanting to build something for a different reason. I wanted to stop being someone who only talked about the idea after a few beers. I called Danny in July, on a Tuesday, standing in my kitchen at 11 at night. "I want to do it," I said. "The consulting thing. I want to actually try." There was a pause on the line. "You serious?" "I don't know if I'm good enough. I don't know if it'll work. But I'm tired of being the guy who has an idea he never tries." "Okay," Danny said, and I could hear him smiling. "Then let's actually try it." I didn't quit my job that week. I want to be honest about the pace of this, because nothing about it was instant, and anyone telling you it was would be lying to make a better story. I kept working at Hallbrook during the day and building the framework for Danny's business at night, auditing his shipping contracts, mapping his fulfillment bottlenecks, building a system to cut his logistics costs by identifying redundant vendor contracts he didn't know he had. It took me 6 weeks of nights and weekends before I had something real to show him. When I did, his cost savings were significant enough that he paid me for the work without me asking, and then asked if I'd be willing to look at his friend's business too. That was the first domino. Small, unglamorous, almost embarrassing in its size. But it was real. I want to talk about August, because August was the month I started becoming someone slightly different, in ways too small to notice day to day, but big enough to notice looking back. I started waking up at 6, not because someone told me to, but because I wanted the extra 2 hours before work to build something. I started going to the gym, not out of vanity, though I won't pretend that wasn't part of it, but because moving my body helped quiet a mind that had spent 3 months chewing on the same 5 words. I read books I'd been meaning to read for years. I started saying no to things that drained me and yes to things that scared me. Small things. A local small business meetup at a brewery downtown, where I stood in a corner not knowing anyone, forcing myself to talk to 3 strangers instead of leaving after 20 minutes like the old version of me would have. One of those strangers was a woman named Priya, who ran a small e-commerce fulfillment company and needed exactly the kind of help I was starting to offer. She became my second client in September. None of this felt extraordinary while it was happening. It felt like survival with better lighting. I didn't call Melissa. She didn't call me. We had exactly one interaction that summer, in early August, when she texted asking if I still had her yoga mat, which had ended up in a hallway closet somehow. Yeah, I have it. Want me to drop it off, or you can come by? I'll come by Saturday if that works. She came by on a Saturday afternoon, stood in the doorway like a stranger delivering a package, and took the mat without coming inside. She looked good. She always looked good. But there was something careful in the way she held herself, like she was bracing for a version of this conversation that never came. How are you? She asked. I'm okay. Better than I was. Good. That's good. A pause. Are you still at Holbrook? For now. She nodded, like she wanted to ask more and decided not to. Take care of yourself, she said, and left. I stood in the doorway for a while after her car pulled away, feeling something I didn't expect. Not longing, exactly. More like the quiet satisfaction of realizing I hadn't needed her to notice anything for the conversation to feel okay. By October, I had 4 clients. Small ones, but real ones, and the income from consulting had started to approach what I made at Holbrook. I still hadn't quit. Something in me, call it caution, call it the residue of 5 years with a woman who valued security in a specific, anxious way, kept me from jumping without a longer runway. Danny thought I was overthinking it. You're already doing the work of 2 jobs, he said. At some point, the safety net becomes the thing holding you down. I know. So I'm working up to it. He didn't push harder, which I appreciated, because I think he understood that some decisions have to be made on your own timeline, even when someone else can see the answer more clearly than you can. I quit Holbrook in November. My manager, a decent guy named Frank who'd never once made me feel bad about being unremarkable, shook my hand and told me he'd wondered for 2 years when I'd finally do something with the ideas he knew I had. I hadn't realized he'd noticed. It made me wonder what else I'd been too afraid to let people see. I named the business Ferris Logistics Consulting after my grandfather, who'd driven a delivery truck for 30 years and used to tell me that the whole economy runs on people getting things to other people, and nobody ever thanks the guy who makes sure it happens on time. I liked the idea of honoring something unglamorous with something that might, eventually, be a little less unglamorous. The winter was hard. Not everything I've told you about this year has been a straight climb, and I don't want to make it sound like one. I lost a client in December, a warehouse operation in Colorado Springs that decided my rates weren't worth it, which stung more than I expected, because it made me question the whole premise of what I was doing. There were nights I sat with my laptop open, staring at an invoice template, wondering if Melissa's sentence had actually just been an accurate diagnosis, delivered a little cruelly, of a man who was never going to be more than what he already was. Danny talked me off that ledge more than once. You lost a client. You didn't lose the ability to do the work. Feels the same some nights. It's not. Losing a client is a Tuesday. Losing your nerve is the actual problem. Don't confuse the two. I kept going, because the alternative, going back to a version of myself who only thought about the idea, never tried it, felt worse than the risk of failing at it. By February, I had 6 clients and had hired a part-time bookkeeper, a woman named Carla who worked out of her home in Lakewood and kept telling me my invoicing system was held together with hope, which was probably accurate. I met Sarah in March at a mutual friend's birthday dinner, and I want to be clear about something. This isn't a story where a new woman appears to prove a point to an old one. Sarah mattered to me on her own terms, independent of Melissa, independent of anything I was trying to prove. She was a physical therapist, Practical in a way I found calming after years of ambient tension, funny in a way that didn't require me to catch up to it. She waited for you. We started seeing each other slowly, carefully, both of us a little bruised from things that had happened before we met. You talk about your business like it's a person you're worried about, she told me once, a few weeks in. Is that weird? No. It's kind of sweet. Most people talk about their jobs like they're a prison sentence. I told her, eventually, about Melissa. Not everything, but enough. The sentence. The 5 years. The quiet unraveling. Do you think she was right? Sarah asked, not unkindly. I thought about it for a long moment before answering, because I wanted to give her, and myself, a real answer, not a defensive one. I think she was right that I was hiding from something, I said. I don't think she was right about why, or what it meant about who I was. But I don't know if I'd have figured that out without her saying it. Sarah nodded slowly. That's a generous way to think about someone who left you. Maybe. I'm still working on the ungenerous version some nights. She laughed, and I did too, and it felt like the first time in a year I'd been able to laugh about any of it without an ache underneath the sound. By May, 1 year after the breakup, though I didn't track it that precisely at the time, it's only in hindsight that the anniversary lines up. Ferris Logistics Consulting had 11 active clients, 2 of them mid-sized regional distributors that had come through referrals rather than my own hustling, which felt like a different kind of validation than the hustling itself. I started getting invited to speak. Small things, at first, a panel at a regional logistics meetup, a guest slot on a business podcast with maybe 400 listeners. I was terrified the first time, sweating through my shirt before I even walked on stage, certain I'd freeze and say nothing worth remembering. I didn't freeze. I talked about the unglamorous parts of small business logistics, the invoicing nightmares, the vendor contracts nobody reads, the 4-truck operations that lose money because nobody's ever taught them to see their own systems clearly. People laughed at the right moments. Someone came up afterward and said it was the first talk all day that didn't feel like a sales pitch. That comment stuck with me more than I expected, not because it was flattering, but because it told me something about what I was actually good at, not selling an image of success, but being honest about how unglamorous the road to it really was. In July, Danny's business, now one of my biggest case studies, was profiled in a regional business journal, and the article mentioned the consulting work that had helped restructure his fulfillment costs. My name was in there, in a small paragraph near the bottom, but it was there. That article led to a call from a conference organizer in August, someone putting together a regional small business summit in Denver for the following spring, looking for speakers who could talk honestly about operational growth without the usual empty motivational language. We want someone who sounds like a real person, the organizer told me on the phone, not someone reading off a slide. I told her I could do that. I wasn't sure yet if it was true, but I said it anyway, because saying yes to things that scared me had become, slowly, the only method I trusted anymore. The conference was scheduled for early January, 8 months after that phone call, at a hotel ballroom downtown. The same kind of generic, chandeliered space where I'd once stood at a coffee station with a woman named Melissa and let her start a conversation I hadn't known would change the shape of my life twice. I didn't know Melissa would be there. I want to be honest that there was no engineered reunion in this story, no elaborate plan on my part to be seen. Business summits like this pull from dozens of local companies, and her ad agency, the one she'd been chasing a directorship at for years, had apparently bought a table for the event as part of a client relations push. She wasn't there for me. She was there because her firm's newest account happened to be a sponsor. She told me later she almost didn't go. She'd had a long week. She'd thought about skipping it, and only came because her boss specifically asked her to represent the agency at the client table. I found all of this out afterward. In the moment, I had no idea she was in the room. I want to describe the morning of the talk honestly, because it wasn't glamorous. I woke up at 5, ran through my notes twice, changed my shirt 3 times, and threw up once in the hotel bathroom from nerves. Not a detail I'd have included a year earlier, but I've stopped pretending nerves aren't real just because I've gotten better at managing them. Danny came to support me, sitting in the second row with a coffee he didn't drink, the same nervous habit I used to have. You've done this before, he said backstage. Smaller rooms. Same you. Bigger room, though. Same nerves, bigger room. That's all it is. I walked out when they called my name. The lights were brighter than I expected, and for the first 3 seconds I couldn't see past the front 2 rows, which was probably a mercy. I started with a story, the one about Danny's warehouse, the redundant vendor contracts nobody had noticed for 4 years, the moment he realized how much money had been quietly leaking out of his business because nobody had ever taught him what to look for. I told it the way I'd told it a dozen times before, but something about the room, the attention in it, the stillness, made the story land differently than it ever had. I hadn't even finished the story when the applause started. It wasn't polite applause. It built, the way applause does when something in a room actually lands, people shifting from listening to reacting, and before I'd said my next sentence, people were standing. I stood there for a second, genuinely unsure what to do with it, some old instinct in me wanting to apologize for the disruption, before I let myself just take it in. That's when I saw her. Near the back, half standing along with everyone else, her hand slightly raised to her mouth, an expression on her face I couldn't fully read from that distance. Somewhere between shock and something else I wouldn't understand until later. Melissa. I finished the talk. I want to be honest that some part of my brain spent the rest of those 20 minutes on autopilot, delivering material I knew cold, while another part of me sat frozen on the fact of her presence in the room. I don't think anyone noticed. Maybe Danny did. He gave me a look afterward that suggested he'd clocked something in my face during the last 10 minutes that hadn't been there before. You good? He asked, as I stepped off stage into the wings. She's here. Whose? He stopped. Melissa. Back row. Client table for one of the sponsors. Danny exhaled slowly. Okay. You don't have to do anything about that. I know. You want to, though. I didn't answer because I didn't have an answer yet. I didn't seek her out. I want that to be clear because it would be easy to write this as a story where I engineered the moment to make a point, and that's not who I wanted to be, even in the version of myself that had spent a year building something specifically so he'd never again have to sit across from someone telling him his heart was the whole ceiling of his life. I did my rounds after the talk, the obligatory small talk with organizers, business cards exchanged with 3 different regional companies, a producer asking if I'd be interested in a longer speaking engagement in the spring. I was in the middle of that conversation, half listening, when I felt someone approach from the side. Hi, Melissa said. I turned. Up close. She looked the same and completely different. The same face I'd loved for 5 years, but something in her expression I'd never seen directed at me before. Not pity, not superiority, something closer to humility. Hi, I said. I didn't know you'd be here. I didn't know you would either. We stood there for a second in a silence that would have been unbearable a year ago and was, now, just a silence. Uncomfortable, but survivable. That was really good, she said. The talk. I mean that. Thank you. I don't. She stopped, started again. I wasn't trying to end up here. I want you to know that. My firm has the account. I almost didn't come today. I believe you. She looked down for a second, then back up at me, and I could see her working up to something. Do you have a few minutes? I know this is probably the last thing you want to do right now. I thought about it. Genuinely thought about it. Weighing whether I owed her any of my time, whether talking to her would undo something I'd spent a year building. Yeah, I said. I've got a few minutes. We found a quiet corner near the hotel's coffee bar, away from the noise of the ballroom crowd filtering out. She ordered a coffee she didn't drink. I didn't order anything. I've thought about that morning a lot, she said, finally. More than I probably should have. Which morning? You know which one. I did. I've replayed what I said probably 100 times, she went on. At the time I thought I was being honest. I still think I was being honest. But I think I said it like it was a fact about you instead of a fear about me. I didn't say anything, letting her finish. My mom raised us alone. You know that. I think some part of me has spent my whole life terrified of ending up dependent on someone who wasn't going anywhere, and I put that fear on you instead of carrying it myself. That's not fair to you. I knew it wasn't fair, some part of me, even while I was saying it. You weren't wrong that I was hiding, I said. I had this whole idea for years and never told you about it. Not because you wouldn't have supported it, because I was scared of what your face would do if I said it out loud and you didn't believe in it. She flinched slightly at that, like it landed somewhere true. I would have believed in it, she said quietly. Maybe. I'll never know, because I never gave either of us the chance to find out. We sat with that for a moment. For what it's worth, she said. I've thought about that day more times than I'd like to admit. Not because I regret leaving. I think leaving was right, for both of us. But I regret how I said it. You didn't deserve to hear something true delivered like a verdict. I appreciate you saying that. Are you happy? She asked, and I could tell it cost her something to ask it plainly. I thought about Sarah. About the 11 clients. The talk I'd just given. The year of 5 a.m. mornings and near failures and Danny's stubborn belief in me when I hadn't had any in myself. Getting there, I said. It's not perfect, but it's mine. I built it, slowly, mostly by being scared and doing it anyway. She smiled, small and genuine. Good hearts can build extraordinary lives. I was wrong about that part. I think I knew I was wrong even while I said it. I just needed you to prove it to yourself. Not to me. I didn't do it for you, I said, and I meant it gently, not as an attack. I want you to know that. I didn't build any of this to show you up. I know, she said. That's actually the part that makes it land. If you'd done it for me, it wouldn't mean anything. You did it for you. That's why it's real. We talked for another 20 minutes about her promotion the previous spring, finally the directorship she'd been chasing, about Danny's business, about small, unremarkable things that felt, strangely, more honest than anything we'd said to each other in the final year of our relationship. There was no grand reconciliation. I want to be honest about that, because I think a lesser version of this story would end with us walking out of that hotel together. And that's not what happened, and I don't think it should have. I don't think we're supposed to find our way back to each other, she said, as we both stood to leave. I think we were supposed to find our way to becoming the people we are now. I just wish it hadn't cost as much as it did. Yeah, I said. Me too. We hugged, briefly, the kind of hug that closes a chapter instead of reopening one. Take care of yourself, she said. You too, Melissa. She walked toward the hotel exit, and I watched her go, feeling something I hadn't expected to feel, not longing, not triumph. Something quieter. Something like closure actually settling into a place I hadn't realized was still open. I called Sarah that night from my car in the hotel parking garage, the fluorescent lights buzzing overhead the way they always do in those places. How'd it go, she asked. The talk went well. Standing ovation, actually. Wait, seriously? Tell me everything. I told her about the talk. Then, after a pause, I told her about Melissa. Not because I owed her a confession, but because I didn't want anything unspoken sitting between us the way things had gone unspoken with Melissa for years. How do you feel? Sarah asked, when I finished. I sat with the question for a second before answering, because I wanted to give her the true answer, not the easy one. Lighter, I said. Like something I'd been carrying without noticing finally got put down. Good, she said. That's good. We talked for another 20 minutes about nothing in particular. Her day at the clinic, a patient who'd finally walked without a cane after 8 months of work, the kind of small, unglamorous victory that no one throws a parade for, but that means everything to the person living it. I thought, listening to her, about how much of a real life is built from exactly that kind of victory. Not a single ovation. 1,000 quiet Tuesdays where you show up anyway. Danny and I got dinner a week later, at the same wing place off Colfax where he'd first told me to just do it, for years and a whole life ago. You look different, he said, halfway through his second beer. Different how? I don't know. Like you finally believe you're allowed to be here. I thought about that for a while. It was true, in a way I hadn't fully named until he said it. She apologized, I told him. Melissa, at the conference. How do you feel about that? Fine, actually. Better than fine. I think I needed to hear it, but I don't think I needed it as much as I would have a year ago. Danny nodded slowly. That's the whole thing, isn't it? You didn't build any of this waiting for her to say sorry. You built it, and the apology just happened to show up after. Yeah, I said. That's exactly it. I still think about that sentence sometimes. Good hearts rarely build extraordinary lives. I don't think it's true, not the way she meant it that morning. But I understand now why she believed it, and I understand what it cost me to finally prove, mostly to myself, that she was wrong. The business kept growing, slowly, the unglamorous way. Not overnight. Not through revenge or spite, but through 5 a.m. mornings and small failures and a handful of people. Danny, Sarah, even Frank from my old job, who believed in me before I fully believed in myself. Melissa and I don't talk much now. Once or twice a year. Maybe a message on a birthday. Nothing more. I don't think we're supposed to be more than that to each other anymore. And I've made peace with that in a way I couldn't have a year ago. Some nights I still think about that toothbrush sitting in the bathroom cup for 3 weeks after she left, neither of us willing to be the one who admitted it was really over. I think about the version of me who let that silence sit there instead of speaking. I don't think about him with anger anymore. Just with a kind of tired affection, the way you look at an old photograph of someone you used to be. I closed the office door behind me that night, after dinner with Danny, walked out into a cold Denver evening with my coat pulled tight, and drove home to an apartment that finally, quietly, felt like mine.